but let us continue the discussion with Alan Dershowitz and also welcome in retired Air Force General Michael Hayden, of course, who also served as director of the NSA and the CIA. Today, Mike is a principal with the Chertoff Group. Mike, we're glad to have you, and obviously this Sony hack carries with it genuine national security implications. Could you briefly outline those as they come to mind for you?
Sure. This is a remarkable event, JD, but not totally unexpected. Folks I know talking about this view this as just the next logical step in the growth of cyber dangers. We knew this was coming. It's just a little bit unique that it's coming from such a backward country as North Korea. A couple of general observations. Number one, the private sector has to assume far more responsibility for its own defense here than it has in the past. And I must admit, Sony's behavior in this, from flash all the way to bang, has really been disappointing. Second, these kinds of attacks pose incredibly difficult policy, not technology, but policy problems for the government. How do we view them? How do we characterize them? Is this a crime? Is it something more? What should we do to defend or to respond? And frankly, those last sets of questions, they're still unanswered.
And they're under consideration at the White House. But let me turn again to Alan Dershowitz. Alan, you are always concerned about First Amendment rights and freedoms. This was worse than a retreat by Sony. It was an out-and-out surrender, was it not?
And Sony has an obligation not only to its shareholders, but it is a holder of our First Amendment rights. It has an obligation to the general public. If you're a media company, you have to go beyond profits, and you have to ask yourself, what am I doing to protect America's freedoms? And I just want to follow up on what the general said. And it's so important to understand that North Korea is nothing compared to what Iran will someday be able to do. One of the reasons we can't fight back against North Korea is because they have an atomic bomb. Imagine an Iranian regime with nuclear weapons and greater technological sophistication. Remember, these are the people who put out the fatwa on Salman Rushdie. These are the people who threatened to kill those who did the cartoons. You give Iran a nuclear weapon and let it flex its nuclear muscles and its computer together, and North Korea will seem like nothing in compared to that. So we have to look at this as an object lesson to make sure we prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
Alan expounds on the theme of nukes. Michael Hayden, we look back in history, 52 years ago, nukes off our shores, Soviet nukes in Cuba, before the president wanted to renew diplomatic relations. We had a spy there who was in prison for 20 years, Rolando Trujillo, as we have his name, both at Newsmax.com and as the New York Times revealed that name. What can you tell us about this espionage agent now back in the United States?
Not a great deal, JD, but I can give you a couple of thoughts. Number one, Cuba, despite the closeness to the United States, despite the Cuban exile community here, Cuba was an incredibly difficult intelligence target. Their internal intelligence services were just really good at what they did. So this individual taking on this task was incredibly heroic, and I'm very glad that we were able to get him back. And look, swapping spies is traditional business in my old line of work. I've got no problems with this at all.
Let me just ask you, Michael, from a security standpoint, 20 seconds for the response. Should the New York Times have released this man's name?
No, I don't think they should have. Security and privacy. Give the man a break. He's coming back. Let us give him some time.
Let's see what our champion of the First Amendment, Alan Dershowitz, the noted attorney, has to say. Alan, your take on the New York Times naming this spy.
Well, first of all, as the general said, we exchange spies all the time. It's time for the United States to give Jonathan Pollard, who's served almost 30 years, his freedom. You know, we love spies when they spy for us, but we hate them when they spy against us.
Yeah.
And the time has come to release Jonathan Pollard, I believe.
Well,
but the First Amendment has to be balanced against national security, and I think probably the name should not have been released. The name is not important. It's what he did that's important.
fair enough. You had a Holiday Inn treaty for the release of Israeli produced by Jonathan Pollard, and there's commonality between the General and the First Amendment attorney on privacy and national security. In the spirit of the holidays, gentlemen, we thank you for your time, and we'll be right back.